I never imagined I would find myself in a face-off with the HOA president during a full-blown blizzard, but that is exactly where I was, sitting in my truck as Brenda Carmichael intentionally parked her white Lexus SUV straight across the road in front of my snowplow at 3 in the morning. This was happening while the worst winter storm in 15 years dumped nearly 3 feet of snow on Westfield, Massachusetts. I should probably explain how it got to that point. My name is Brandon Zimmerman, and I own a landscaping company that switches over to snow removal once winter hits. I have lived in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision for 8 years, and for the last 5 winters, I have held the contract to plow the neighborhood roads during snowstorms. The work pays well, and since I already have the trucks and equipment, it is a logical seasonal extension of my business. Meadowbrook Hills has roughly 200 homes laid out along winding streets with names like Maple Ridge Drive and Willow Creek Lane, and when a serious storm rolls in, keeping those roads open is not optional. Everything started to go sideways about 6 months earlier when Brenda Carmichael took over as HOA president. She was the type of middle-aged woman who seemed to thrive on finding things to complain about. Within her first week in charge, she sent violation notices to a dozen homeowners for issues like trash cans being visible from the street and mailbox posts that were the wrong shade of white. My first notice came because my work truck, which has my company logo on the door, was parked in my driveway instead of inside the garage. According to Brenda's interpretation of the bylaws, commercial vehicles were not supposed to be visible from the street. I ignored the first notice. The second one showed up with a $50 fine attached. I paid it, but I also started squeezing my truck into the garage, even though that meant pulling my wife's car out every morning first. My wife, Sarah, told me to just deal with it and move on, saying that going to war with the HOA was not worth the stress. She worked as a nurse at Bay State Medical Center in Springfield and already had more than enough pressure in her life without adding HOA drama. Brenda, however, was just getting started. She went after my neighbor Tom over his solar panels, claiming they were not an approved style. She fined the Hendersons because their rose bushes were 6 inches taller than allowed under the landscaping rules. She even tried to stop kids from playing basketball in their own driveways after 5 in the evening, arguing that the bouncing ball violated quiet hours. People in the neighborhood were fed up, but Brenda had stacked the HOA board with her friends Patricia Morrison and Linda Chin, and the 3 of them voted together on everything. Appealing any decision they made was basically pointless. Then came the issue with my snowplow contract. In early November, Brenda called me into an HOA board meeting. I went in assuming it would be a routine renewal, but instead she told me they were changing the terms. She wanted a 30% reduction in my per storm fee and expected me to be available to plow within 30 minutes of her call, no matter the hour or whatever else I had going on. I told her that was unreasonable. I had other clients besides Meadowbrook Hills, and I could not abandon them on a whim. On top of that, fuel and maintenance costs had gone up, so cutting my rate made no sense. I offered to keep the same rate as the previous year, but I was not taking a pay cut. Her face turned red and she said if I did not agree they would hire someone else. I told her to go ahead. There were only 3 other companies nearby capable of handling a neighborhood that size, and all of them charged more than I did. She got quotes that came in about 40% higher and returned a week later with a contract at my original rate. She clearly was not happy, and I knew she was waiting for a chance to make things difficult. That chance came with the blizzard. The storm had been on the forecast for days, with meteorologists calling it a historic nor'easter. Predictions were 2 to 3 feet of snow, sustained 40-mile-per-hour winds and near-zero visibility. The governor declared a state of emergency and ordered non-essential vehicles off the road starting at midnight Friday. I had been watching the forecast closely and made sure everything was ready. My primary plow truck is a Ford F550 with an 11-foot blade and a salt spreader mounted on the back. I also run a smaller pickup with an 8-foot blade for tighter areas. Both trucks were fueled and loaded with salt by Thursday night. Snow started falling around 9 Friday evening. By 11, 4 inches had already piled up, and it was coming down fast. I knew I needed to begin plowing around 1 in the morning to stay ahead of it. The contract required regular passes during major storms to keep roads passable, followed by a final cleanup once the snow stopped. I kissed Sarah goodbye around 12:30. She had already left for her night shift at the hospital in her Subaru, which handled snow well. Our kids, Jake who was 9 and Emma who was 7, were asleep upstairs. I fired up the big truck and headed into the storm. The neighborhood was dark and quiet, with only a handful of porch lights glowing. Snow was already close to 8 inches deep and falling hard. I started at the main entrance and worked through the streets in order, pushing snow to the edges where the HOA designated storage areas. By 2:30 I had completed 1 full pass. The roads were drivable, though still coated since the snowfall was outpacing my work. I stopped briefly to sip coffee from my thermos and check my phone. The forecast had been updated to 3 to 4 feet of snow, worse than expected. I was about to begin a second pass when I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive and saw Brenda's white Lexus parked sideways across the road, completely blocking it. I stopped and stared, trying to understand what I was seeing. Her house was on that street, lights were on inside, and there was no reason for her car to be sitting in the middle of the road during a blizzard. I honked once. Nothing. I honked again longer. Still no response. I put the truck in park and climbed down, trudging through deep snow to the SUV. It was empty and locked. I looked toward her house about 50 yards away, and saw her standing in the front window watching me. I waved and pointed at the car, then back at my truck, making it obvious I needed her to move it. She did not move, just stood there with her arms crossed. I called her phone. She answered on the third ring. I told her car was blocking the road and that I needed her to move it so I could plow. She said she knew exactly where her car was, her tone dripping with condescension. I asked again. She accused me of plowing outside authorized hours, saying the contract prohibited loud equipment before 6 in the morning on weekends. I felt my jaw clench. I reminded her there was a state of emergency, that we already had 2 feet of snow and more on the way. She repeated that the contract was clear and said she was documenting the violation. I asked if she was serious, if she really expected the roads to become impassable over a noise complaint during a historic storm. She told me to follow the contract and said we could discuss it at the next board meeting, then ordered me to leave her street until 6. I told her I was not leaving and that I was going to plow. She refused to move her car and warned that if I touched it, she would call the police and have me arrested. Then she hung up. I stood there in the wind and blowing snow trying to process what was happening. She had deliberately blocked the road to stop snow removal during a blizzard over a noise rule. It was unreal. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived a few houses down. He answered groggy. I apologized for waking him and explained what was going on. There was a pause and then he said she blocked the road during the storm. I told him I was staring at her car right now. He said that was insane. What are you supposed to do? I'm not sure. I have to get through that road. Maple Ridge feeds into 4 other streets and if I cannot clear it, about a quarter of the neighborhood is completely cut off. Is there another route you can take? Not really. Because of the way the roads loop, I would have to circle back to the main entrance and come in from the opposite side, and even then I would still need to plow Maple Ridge itself. Do you want me to come out and talk to her? I doubt that would change anything, but I appreciate it. Let me try something else first. I hung up and called the non-emergency police number. A dispatcher picked up and I explained what was going on. She sounded understanding but told me that because of the state of emergency, all units were tied up with crashes and stranded drivers. She said she would request an officer, but it could take several hours. I thanked her and ended the call. Several hours was not an option. By then, another foot of snow would fall and the roads would be completely unusable. I looked at Brenda's Lexus, then at my plow truck, and an idea took shape. It was not a smart idea, but I was freezing, exhausted, and angry. I climbed back into the truck and shifted into gear. I lined up the plow blade with the front of her Lexus and eased forward. The plan was to gently nudge her car out of the way just enough to pass. The blade touched her bumper and I applied light pressure. The Lexus began sliding sideways across the snow. At that moment my phone rang. It was Brenda. "What are you doing?" she screamed. "Moving your car so I can plow. Stop right now. That is destruction of property. I am calling the police." "Go ahead. I am sure they will want to know why you blocked a road during a declared emergency." I hung up and kept pushing. The Lexus slid without much resistance and I managed to angle it off to the side. Once there was enough room, I stopped, backed up, and prepared to keep plowing. That was when Brenda came charging out of her house in a bathrobe and boots, yelling at the top of her lungs. I could not make out her words over the engine and the wind, but her anger was obvious. She stepped directly in front of my truck, arms out as if she could stop it herself. I put the truck in park and rolled down the window. "Brenda, move. I have work to do. You damaged my car. You will pay for that. I am pressing charges. I barely touched it and it was blocking the road during an emergency. Now get out of the way. This is not a public road. This is private HOA property. I am the president, and I am ordering you to leave immediately." She was technically correct. The roads in Meadowbrook Hills were privately owned and maintained by the HOA, not by the town. Still, that did not give her the right to block them. "I have a contract to plow these streets. Brenda, that contract does not pause because you do not like noise during a blizzard. You are fired. Consider the contract terminated." Leave HOA property now. You cannot fire me in the middle of a storm. We have a signed agreement. I absolutely can. The contract allows immediate termination if the contractor is in breach. You violated noise rules and damaged my personal property. You are fired. By then, other residents had noticed the scene and were stepping outside or watching from their windows. I saw Tom walking toward us in his coat and boots. Is everything okay here? He asked. No, it is not okay, Brenda shouted. Brandon assaulted my vehicle and is trespassing on HOA property. Brenda, he is clearing snow during a blizzard, Tom said. Why was your car blocking the street? That is none of your concern. Actually, it is. We all pay HOA fees to keep these roads clear. If you are interfering with that, we have a serious problem. More neighbors were gathering now, the Hendersons, the Patels, and others I recognized. They all looked confused about why this was happening in the middle of a storm. Mrs. Henderson, who had lived there longer than anyone, stepped closer. Brenda, what is going on? Why is your car parked in the road? I was enforcing HOA noise rules, Brenda said, suddenly defensive with an audience. By blocking the snow plow during a state of emergency? Mrs. Henderson looked genuinely stunned. The contract bans loud equipment before 6 on weekends. For heaven's sake, that applies to lawnmowers and leaf blowers, not emergency snow removal. The contract does not specify that, Brenda insisted. Then it is a badly written contract, Mr. Patel said. Brandon needs to plow. We have elderly residents and people who need access once the storm ends. You are putting everyone at risk. I am upholding community standards and making sure contractors follow agreements. This argument was going nowhere. I checked my watch. It was nearly 3 in the morning and I was wasting time while snow kept falling. I made my decision. Brenda, I am finishing the job. If you want to pursue legal action later, that is your choice, but people need passable roads now. If you continue, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Then call the police. I am sure they will drop everything to arrest someone for plowing snow in a blizzard. I rolled up the window and put the truck in gear. Brenda stood there for a moment, and I honestly thought she might refuse to move, but Tom and Mr. Patel each took an arm and guided her aside. She did not resist much, likely realizing how it would look if she forced the issue. I continued plowing. Brenda stormed back inside, shouting about lawsuits and criminal charges. The neighbors slowly dispersed, shaking their heads. For the next 3 hours, I worked through the neighborhood, making multiple passes as snow kept coming down. Brenda called several times, but I ignored every call. Around 6 in the morning, the snowfall finally began to ease. By 7 it had stopped. We ended up with just over 3 feet, exactly as forecasted. I made a final pass through every street, pushing back banks and clearing as much as possible. The neighborhood looked buried, snow piled high on both sides and drifts reaching windows, but the roads were clear enough to drive, and that was what mattered. I was finishing the main entrance around 8:30 when a police cruiser pulled in. I stopped and waited as an officer stepped out. He looked young, maybe late 20s, with snow clinging to his uniform. Brandon Zimmerman, he asked. That is me. I am Officer Mitchell. I have received several calls this morning about a dispute involving snow removal. Let me guess, Brenda Carmichael, he said with a faint smile. Among others, actually. Can you tell me what happened? I explained everything step by step, from Brenda blocking the road to me pushing her car aside so I could keep plowing. I showed him my HOA contract and explained the dispute over the noise clause. Officer Mitchell listened carefully while taking notes. When I finished, he said, so you physically moved her vehicle without permission? Yes. It was blocking the road during a declared emergency. I tried calling her. She refused to move it and I needed to get through. She is claiming you damaged her car. I pushed it slowly through snow with my blade. I do not see how there could be major damage, but I have not looked closely. Would you be willing to come inspect the vehicle now? Sure. We drove separately to Brenda's house. Her Lexus was still where I left it, angled awkwardly with the front buried in a snowbank. Brenda rushed outside as soon as she saw us, now wearing jeans and a sweater. Officer, thank goodness you are here, she said. This man assaulted my vehicle and harassed me all night. Madam, I am here to assess the situation, Officer Mitchell said evenly. May we look at your car? We walked over together. Brenda dramatically pointed at the front bumper, showing some scratches and a small dent. Look at that. He rammed my car with his plow. This will cost thousands. Officer Mitchell studied it closely. These scratches appear superficial. The dent is minor. This does not look like ramming. He still damaged my property without permission. Madam, why was your car blocking the road during a blizzard? Brenda launched into her explanation about noise bylaws and the HOA agreement. Officer Mitchell listened, growing more skeptical. So you blocked a private road you are responsible for maintaining because the contractor was working at a time you disagreed with. I was enforcing community standards during a state of emergency declared by the governor. HOA bylaws override state rules on private property. Officer Mitchell rubbed his forehead. He looked exhausted, like someone who had been handling emergencies all night. Madam, that is not correct. During a declared emergency, state regulations absolutely apply, including access and safety. Are you saying he had the right to damage my car? I'm saying you should not have blocked the road. Mr. Zimmerman was fulfilling his contract and keeping the neighborhood safe. The damage appears minimal and resulted from your actions. I want to press charges. For what exactly? Destruction of property. Trespassing. Officer Mitchell sighed. Madam, he has a contract to be here. That is not trespassing. Any damage would be civil, not criminal. You would need to go through insurance or small claims court. Frankly, since you created the situation, I do not believe you would win. Brenda's face turned bright red. This is outrageous. I am the victim and you are taking his side. I am not taking sides. I am explaining the law. Is there anything else I can help with? I have been awake for 20 hours handling real emergencies. I want to file a formal complaint. You can do that at the station. He handed her his card with his name and badge number. Then he turned to me. Mr. Zimmerman, avoid moving other people's vehicles in the future. Call us instead. I did call. Dispatch said it would take hours. I understand. Just try to avoid physical confrontations. Will do. Thank you, officer. He nodded and walked back to his cruiser. Brenda stood there glaring as he drove off. You have not heard the last of this, she said. I figured as much and went back to my truck. I got home around 9:30, completely exhausted. Sarah was back from work making breakfast for the kids. They were excited about the snow and wanted to go sledding. I hugged them all and collapsed on the couch. Rough night? Sarah asked, handing me coffee. You have no idea. I told her everything about Brenda and the confrontation. Sarah listened in disbelief. She blocked the road with her car? Is she insane? Apparently. What happens now? I do not know. She will probably sue me or push the HOA to do it, maybe both. Sarah sat beside me. We should get a lawyer. I know. I will call one Monday. The kids ran in begging me to take them sledding. Even exhausted, I could not say no. We spent a couple of hours at the park watching Jake and Emma race down the hill. It helped to focus on something simple after the stress. Over the next few days, Brenda's response became clear. On Sunday, I received a formal HOA letter signed by her and the board, terminating my snow removal contract immediately and demanding $4,000 for damage to her car. The letter accused me of breaching multiple provisions and committing criminal destruction of property. On Monday, I was served a small claims summons. Brenda was suing me for $5,000, the maximum allowed in Massachusetts. The complaint listed vehicle damage, emotional distress, and harassment. I called a lawyer friend, Marcus Rodriguez, who handled civil cases. He reviewed everything and laughed. This is absurd, he said. She has no case, but you will still have to defend yourself, which costs time and money. Can I countersue? For what? Interfering with my business. She terminated my contract without cause. Marcus thought for a moment. Possibly. The contract likely has termination clauses. Let me read it closely and call you back. He called the next day. Good news and bad news. The contract allows immediate termination for breach, but the breach must be material and documented. Brenda is claiming a noise violation. It could be argued that it was a material breach, but that argument is weak. Any reasonable reading of the noise clause would clearly include an exception for emergencies. So what was the next move? We defend against her lawsuit, which should be straightforward, and we send a formal demand letter to the HOA stating that the contract termination was improper and demanding that they either reinstate the contract or compensate me for the remainder of the winter season. Would it work? That depended. If the HOA board continued backing Brenda, probably not. But there was another factor. A lot of homeowners were about to be very unhappy about losing snow removal service in the middle of winter, and that gave us leverage. Marcus was right about the homeowners. By Wednesday, I had received calls and texts from at least 20 residents thanking me for plowing during the storm and expressing confusion and anger over the contract being terminated. Tom took the initiative and organized a petition calling for an emergency HOA meeting to address the issue. Within 2 days, he had gathered signatures from more than 100 households. According to the HOA bylaws, the board was required to hold a special meeting if a petition was signed by at least 20% of the homeowners. With over 100 signatures, Tom had far exceeded that requirement. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I spent the weekend preparing. Marcus helped me assemble a clear timeline of events, copies of all relevant documents, and a short statement explaining my side calmly and clearly. He also filed a formal response to Brenda's lawsuit, denying her claims and asserting several defenses, including that her own actions had caused the situation. Tuesday night arrived and the community center was packed. Nearly 200 people showed up, which was unheard of. Normally, HOA meetings attracted maybe 15 residents. Brenda sat at the front table with Patricia and Linda, and all three looked visibly nervous. Tom called the meeting to order since he had organized the petition. He explained that the purpose of the meeting was to review the termination of the snow removal contract and vote on whether it should be reinstated. Brenda immediately objected, saying this was not a proper board meeting and that residents could not simply override board decisions. Tom calmly held up a copy of the bylaws and explained that under Article 7, Section 3, any board decision could be overturned by a majority vote of homeowners present at a special meeting called by petition. He reminded everyone that the petition requirements had been met, the meeting was valid, and a vote would take place. Brenda shouted that it was a witch hunt and accused everyone of ganging up on her because she enforced the rules. Mrs. Henderson stood and pointed out that Brenda had blocked a road during a blizzard and then fired the only contractor willing to plow the streets at a reasonable cost. She said this was not about rule enforcement but about poor judgment. Brenda insisted she was protecting community standards, and someone from the back shouted that she was just being petty. The room erupted as people stood and argued over one another. Tom repeatedly banged the gavel until the room quieted. He asked everyone to proceed in an orderly way and said I was present to explain what happened. I walked to the front and delivered my statement, keeping it factual and controlled. I described the events from the night of the storm, my interaction with Brenda, the lawsuit, and the contract termination. I also reminded everyone that the HOA currently had no snow removal contractor and that another storm was forecast for the coming weekend. When I finished, Brenda demanded to respond. She gave her version of events, focusing heavily on the noise clause and claiming I had been aggressive and threatening. She held up photos of her car's bumper, pointing out scratches and a dent, and claimed I had rammed her vehicle and could have seriously injured her. Mr. Patel calmly pointed out that she was not inside the car and had been watching from her house. Brenda said that was irrelevant. Mr. Patel responded that from his perspective, she had created a dangerous situation during an emergency and was now trying to punish someone for fixing it. Arguments broke out again. Patricia and Linda attempted to defend Brenda, but they were drowned out by angry residents. Eventually, Tom restored order and announced it was time to vote. He called for all those in favor of overturning the board's decision to terminate my snow removal contract to say yes. The response was overwhelming. When he asked for those opposed, only Brenda, Patricia, Linda, and a handful of others responded. The motion passed by a wide margin. Tom announced that the contract was reinstated. Brenda stood up, furious, and shouted that the decision was illegal and that she would sue the HOA and everyone involved. Tom responded calmly that she was free to try, but the bylaws were clear. Brenda then shouted that she was resigning as president and stormed out, followed by Patricia and Linda. The room fell silent for a moment before someone began clapping. Within seconds, the entire room joined in. Tom looked at me and smiled, saying it looked like I was back in business. I replied that it also looked like they needed a new HOA president. Tom said that would be handled at the next regular meeting and asked if I could manage the upcoming storm. I said absolutely. The weekend storm turned out to be mild compared to the blizzard, with only about 8 inches of snow, and I cleared the neighborhood without incident. Brenda's house remained dark both nights and her Lexus stayed in the garage. Neighbors later told me she had barely left her house since the meeting. The small claims court date arrived in early February. Marcus attended with me even though I technically could have gone alone. Brenda appeared with her own attorney, a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit. The case was heard by a magistrate who looked like he had seen every trivial dispute imaginable. Brenda's lawyer went first, arguing that I had intentionally damaged her property and caused emotional distress. They submitted photos of the bumper damage along with a repair estimate totaling $3,800. Marcus cross-examined Brenda and repeatedly asked why she had blocked the road during a declared state of emergency. She tried to redirect the discussion to the noise clause, but Marcus pressed her for direct answers. He asked whether her car had been blocking the road, whether she refused to move it when asked, and whether she knew a state of emergency had been declared. Each time she tried to justify her actions instead of answering directly. The magistrate eventually instructed her to answer yes or no, and she admitted that she was aware of the emergency but refused to move the car anyway. Marcus then summarized that despite the emergency, despite being asked to move, and despite residents needing access, she chose not to, and the magistrate cut in as the tension in the room continued to build. "Carmichael, I have heard enough. Your behavior was unreasonable, and you created the situation you are now complaining about. Mr. Zimmerman responded to your obstruction by moving your vehicle only as much as necessary to do his job. The damage shown in these photos is minor and would not have occurred if you had simply moved your car. I am dismissing your claim." Brenda's attorney tried to object, but the magistrate was finished. He struck the gavel and called the next case. We stepped out of the courthouse into the bright February sun. Marcus patted me on the shoulder. "That went about as well as it possibly could have," he said. "Thanks for backing me up." "No problem. Just send me a bill for plowing your driveway this winter and we will call it even." I laughed. Marcus lived 3 streets away and I had been clearing his driveway for free for years. Over the following weeks, life slowly settled back into normal. The HOA held elections for a new president, and Mrs. Henderson won by a wide margin. She was fair, level-headed, and actually read the bylaws before making decisions. One of her first actions was revising the noise clause to clearly allow exceptions for emergency services and snow removal. Brenda stopped attending HOA meetings altogether. I later heard from Sarah, who worked with someone that knew one of Brenda's friends at the hospital, that Brenda had been telling people she was bullied and harassed by the neighborhood. Supposedly, she was thinking about moving away. In early March, I received a call from a detective with the Westfield Police Department. His name was Detective Polson, and he said he needed to ask me a few questions about Brenda Carmichael. "What about her?" I asked. "Could you come down to the station?" "I would prefer to talk in person." That did not sound reassuring. I called Marcus and he agreed to meet me there. An hour later, we arrived at the station and were shown into an interview room where Detective Polson was waiting. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with gray hair and worn, tired eyes. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "Let me be clear, you are not in any trouble. I just need some background information." "About what?" Marcus asked. "We are investigating Ms. Carmichael for insurance fraud and filing false police reports." I blinked. "What?" Detective Polson opened a file. "After your dispute in January, Ms. Carmichael submitted a claim to her auto insurance company. She claimed you deliberately rammed her car during the snowstorm, causing major damage. The insurer paid out $4,000 for repairs." "Okay," I said carefully. "The issue is that the evidence does not support her version of events. Officer Mitchell's report from that night describes only minor damage, consistent with a slow push through packed snow. But Ms. Carmichael's insurance claim lists severe front-end damage, including a bent frame, radiator damage, and broken headlights." "I definitely did not cause that kind of damage," I said. "We do not believe you did. We obtained surveillance footage from several neighbors with security cameras. One camera shows Miss Carmichael's vehicle 2 days after the storm. Want to guess what it shows?" "What?" "Her backing into a concrete pillar inside a parking garage at full speed. The entire front end was crushed." I stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely. She then blamed all of that damage on you in her insurance claim. That constitutes insurance fraud. She also filed multiple police reports accusing you of harassment and stalking, which our investigation found to be entirely false." "That is filing false reports." "So what happens next?" Marcus asked. "We are building the case. I wanted to confirm the timeline and get your statement regarding the actual damage you caused. I also wanted to let you know that you may be asked to testify if this goes to trial." I gave my statement, explaining exactly what happened and confirming that I only pushed her car slowly through the snow. Detective Polson thanked me and said he would be in touch. Marcus and I walked out of the station in a daze. "Insurance fraud," Marcus said, shaking his head. "She really tried to destroy you. How serious is this for her?" "Insurance fraud is a felony in Massachusetts. If they prove she intentionally damaged her own car and blamed you, she could face jail time, heavy fines, and repayment to the insurance company. The false police reports are misdemeanors on top of that. She could end up with a permanent criminal record." "Part of me feels bad for her," I said. "Do not. She did this to herself and tried to ruin your reputation and livelihood." Word of Brenda's arrest spread through the neighborhood almost instantly. She was arrested in late March and charged with insurance fraud and 3 counts of filing false police reports. Her mugshot appeared on the local news, and the story was picked up by regional outlets because of how strange it was. The HOA board, now under Mrs. Henderson's leadership, issued a statement distancing itself from Brenda's actions and apologizing to me. I appreciated it, but by then I just wanted to move forward. Brenda's house went on the market in April. I later heard she accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 1 count of insurance fraud in exchange for the remaining charges being dropped. She received 2 years of probation, a large fine, and was required to repay the insurance company with penalties. She also lost her real estate license, which had been her career. The house sold quickly. A young couple with a toddler moved in, and they were friendly and easygoing. The husband, David, hired me for their landscaping that spring. One evening in May, Sarah and I sat on our back deck watching the kids play in the yard. The air was warm, the grass was bright green, and everything felt calm again. "Think you will ever have another HOA president block your plow truck?" Sarah asked, sipping her wine. "I hope not," I said. "Once was more than enough." I still cannot believe she committed insurance fraud just to get back at you. People do reckless things when they are angry and feel wronged, even when they caused the problem themselves. Do you think she learned anything from all this? I considered it. Probably not. People like Brenda never think they are wrong. She likely still believes she was enforcing the rules and that everyone turned against her. That is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Jake ran up onto the deck. "Dad, can we have a campfire tonight and roast marshmallows?" "Sure, buddy. I will set up the fire pit." As I walked to the garage to grab firewood, I thought about how the entire mess began with something so simple. A snowstorm, a contract dispute, and someone who could not give up control. It spiraled into lawsuits, criminal charges, and a ruined reputation. All because Brenda chose petty enforcement over common sense. I wondered what might have happened if I had handled things differently. If I had waited for the police that night, maybe none of it would have escalated. But the roads would not have been cleared, people could have been stranded, and Brenda would have continued her power trip. Standing up to unreasonable people has consequences, but letting them walk over you does too. I had made my decision, and even with all the pressure and frustration, I would choose the same path again. That summer went by quietly. The HOA board led by Mrs. Henderson was organized, reasonable, and fair. They revised outdated rules, planned community gatherings, and genuinely paid attention to homeowner concerns. The contrast with Brenda's leadership was stark. In July, I received a letter from Brenda's insurance company stating they were suing her for the full amount of her fraudulent claim, along with legal costs and damages. She had apparently failed to repay them as required under her plea agreement, so they moved forward with a civil case. I was listed as a possible witness, though the attorney who contacted me said my testimony was unlikely to be needed because they already had video proof and her guilty plea. I never learned how that case ended. Brenda was no longer part of our lives, and that was enough for me. The next winter brought another heavy storm, though it was milder than the one that started everything. I cleared the neighborhood without any issues, making steady rounds through the night and wrapping up by morning. Afterward, Mrs. Henderson called to thank me and let me know the board had approved a bonus for my work. She told me they appreciated me and apologized for what I went through the year before. I thanked her and meant it. After hanging up, it hit me that the whole ordeal with Brenda had actually led to positive changes. The HOA was better run, the rules were clearer and more reasonable, and the community was more involved. Sometimes it really does take a crisis to force improvement. Sarah walked into my office while I was buried in paperwork and told me the Johnsons wanted a landscaping quote for their backyard and that I would call them tomorrow. I said that worked. Business was clearly picking up, and she pointed out I had been getting a lot of new clients lately. She was right. The attention from standing up to Brenda and everything that followed had helped my business. People saw that I did the right thing even when it was hard, and they wanted to support that. My landscaping business was busier than it had ever been. I joked that there is always a silver lining, and she agreed as long as there was no more HOA drama. We spent the evening with the kids, helping Jake with his science project and reading stories to Emma before bed. It was simple and perfect, exactly how life should feel. Looking back months later, I can see the situation more clearly. Brenda was not just difficult or petty as an HOA president. She had built her entire identity around control and rules, and when that control was challenged, she fell apart. Instead of admitting fault or finding middle ground, she doubled down, lied, and committed crimes. The sad part is none of it had to happen. If she had simply moved her car that night, everything would have been different. We would have kept a professional relationship, I would have kept plowing, and she would have stayed HOA president. Her need to be right and to punish me for standing up to her ruined her life far more than it ever affected mine. I learned from it as well. Not everyone is reasonable, and not every conflict can be solved calmly. Some people are so attached to their position that facts do not matter. In those situations, you have to stand firm and accept the fallout, because letting them control the outcome has consequences too. The neighborhood learned a lesson as well. The turnout at that emergency HOA meeting proved that when people come together, they can push back against abuse of power. An HOA is meant to serve the community, not dominate it. Brenda forgot that, and the community reminded her forcefully. When fall arrived and the leaves changed, I started getting ready for winter again. I serviced my trucks, stocked up on salt, and reviewed contracts. The HOA agreement was solid now, with clear language and fair expectations. Mrs. Henderson worked closely with me to make sure both sides were protected and nothing could be twisted or misunderstood. One afternoon, Tom stopped by while I was maintaining my equipment and thanked me again for everything that happened the year before. I told him I was just doing my job, but he said I stood up to Brenda when others were too intimidated or tired to bother. He said that took courage. I told him I never set out to be a hero, just to clear snow. He said maybe so, but the neighborhood was better because of it, with an HOA that actually worked, more engaged residents, and one less power-hungry dictator. When you put it that way, I agreed it sounded pretty good. Tom helped me change the oil on one of the trucks, and we talked about football and our kids starting the new school year. It was just normal neighborly conversation, free of tension or drama, and it felt right. That night, I took Sarah out to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Springfield. We sat by the window, watched people pass by, and talked about everything and nothing. Halfway through dinner, she reached for my hand and told me she was proud of me. I asked why, and she said it was for how I handled everything with Brenda, for standing firm without escalating, and for showing our kids what it looks like to do the right thing when it is difficult. I told her I just did what felt right, and she said that was exactly why she was proud. We drove home through the quiet streets of Westfield, lights glowing in windows as families settled in for the night. This was my home, my community, and I had protected it in my own way. Winter came and went without any major problems. I plowed when needed, the HOA paid on time, and life moved on. Brenda became a distant memory, a reminder of what happens when pride and pettiness override common sense. In spring, Mrs. Henderson stepped down as HOA president due to health issues, and new elections were held. Tom won and called me the next day, saying he would need my help keeping things running smoothly. I told him he would do fine and just needed to be fair, listen to people, and avoid blocking plow trucks during blizzards. He laughed and said he could handle that. As months passed and seasons changed, the incident faded further into the past. New families arrived, kids grew older, and life continued. Still, every time it snowed and I climbed into my plow truck in the early hours of the morning, I thought about the night Brenda blocked the road. I thought about my decision to push her car aside and finish the job, and I knew it had been the right call. In the end, that is what it comes down to. When faced with unreasonable opposition, you either stand your ground or give in. I chose to stand. It cost me time, stress, and money at first, but it was worth it. The neighborhood improved, my business grew stronger, and I could live with myself knowing I did the right thing. Doing the right thing is not always clean or easy. Sometimes it leads to lawsuits, investigations, and neighbors yelling in meeting halls, but it is still the right thing. That matters more than comfort or avoiding conflict. Sitting here now on a calm summer evening with my family close and my business thriving, I know without doubt I would do it all again. Brenda taught me that standing up to bullies, even small-time HOA bullies, is worth it. Communities deserve better than people who abuse power and value control over common sense. And if another HOA president ever blocks my plow during a storm, I will probably push their car out of the way again.